Welcome to the Bradenton area, where the easy pace of island life comes naturally, with waves of serene beauty in this unspoiled paradise nestled along the Gulf Coast of Florida. Come immerse. Welcome to the Bradenton area, where the easy pace of island life comes naturally, with waves of serene beauty in this unspoiled paradise nestled along the Gulf Coast of Florida. Come immerse yourself in a coastal playground where miles of beaches let you disconnect from the world. When you're in the Bradenton area, come ready to discover places like historic Bridge Street with one-of-a-kind things to do. Lots of fun surprises, and is a seafood lover's paradise. Venture over to Anna Maria Island, a tucked-away, charming village where the paddleboarding scene offers yoga for the ultimate calming experience. Next, hop over to the breathtaking Robinson Preserve, a coastal wetland with 487 acres of natural habitat that's incredible for water activities, bird watching, sightseeing along endless boardwalks, and from atop the 40-foot tall observation tower. Plan to stay a while to explore vibrant downtown Bradenton, with top-rated attractions for all ages, and a friendly community set along the Bradenton Riverwalk that welcomes you to the land of your heart's desire. With miles of waterfront trails and the family fun zone, take an eclectic turn to an artist's dream come true here in the Village of the Arts. But get ready to be amazed at the Bishop Museum of Science and Nature, specializing in the history of Florida's Gulf Coast. Say cheese. And make sure to check out the arts and culture scene with great galleries like Art Center Manatee with stunning exhibits. Come lose yourself here in the sun-drenched Bradenton area with hidden gems like Longboat Key and pristine beaches like Coquina Beach, where everyone finds their happy place. Wherever you go, beach paths lead to relaxation and warm Gulf breezes. It's time to change your reality here in the Bradenton area and discover Florida's West Coast. Learn more at BradentonGulfIslands.com.
Hello, everybody. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you are. We are happy to welcome you to Global Conference on Education and Research. I would like to invite Dr. Wayne James, the chair of the Glosser Conference, to have her remarks. Dr. James?
I'd like to welcome everyone to the conference, our fourth annual one. And I am co-chair along with Jihan and Muhitan, who have done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of putting this together. Our journey started about 5 years ago when Jihan had a brilliant idea that we needed a conference like this. And our first conference was in 2017. And well, there it is on the, and then the next year we were at Las Vegas, and the third year we were back in Sarasota. And so this is our fourth one. We're trying it out virtually. And I have to say, all of us were pleasantly surprised at how well received this conference has been. We've had large numbers of international presenters at every conference so far. As you can see on the, we've had 360, over 360 submissions for this conference, 650 authors, and 36 from 36 different countries. We've always had, I'm going to say, high 20s to 30 countries at all of our conferences. And this time we have about 175 sessions. So Jihan's brainstorm has turned into quite an event for us, including an offshoot now that we have a journal, the Journal for Global Education and Research. And I think we're on our fifth volume, working on our sixth, because we've had a lot of good articles submitted. And I have to say that this year we're welcoming Muhitin as one of our co-chairs, and he's been what I call the heavy lifter. He's the one who puts the program together. He's the one who keeps the journal running. I think he does yeoman's work for all of us. And we're just happy to have you here. I hope we have a good conference. And again, welcome to our virtual, and we'll see how this all works. So far, it seems to be working fine. So thanks, Jihan.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. James. I would like to thank you for your support over the years. And as Dr. James has already mentioned, that Muhitin Çavuşoğlu, now doctor, he was my student at the University of South Florida in the School of Hospitality and Tourism Management. You may be wondering, what is the relationship of hospitality management to an education conference? And actually, Muhitin is the reason, because once he had his master's degree with in our school, in the hospitality school, he had also his bachelor degree, even high school, from that same field, that we felt that we needed a change for him, including himself, for his PhD. Hence, Dr. James opened her arms to Muhitin and adopted him as, by the way, Dr. James, I don't know if you know, but she has chaired more than 160, if I am mistaken, correct me, Dr. James, PhD
180 students. Now.
180 students in her tenure, which is unbelievable. Of course, Muhitin is one of them, one of the great students, of course, that I had the pleasure to co-chair his dissertation. But again, the story of Gloucester, as Dr. James has outlined here, we have, this is our fourth one. That was kind of like 2017 is when Muhitin was actually a PhD student in education. And then we met with Dr. James and we had this idea. Actually, right now it's virtual. So you don't really see my hospitality students behind the scenes, but they are here. They are the ones who have been helping us, which we will thank them at our closing ceremony. But when we had this in person, actually, my event management class were the class that actually put this event together in terms of not the scientific portion, that's Dr. James and our scientific committee members, but all the operationalization, all the operations, all the real, the hospitality, hosting this event at the University of South Florida, Sarasota Manatee campus in 2017. Then UNLV were kind enough to host us there 1 year, and then we came back. But of course, 2020, unfortunately, as you all know, was canceled. We didn't know what to do. Should we have it? Should we not have it? And should we have it virtually? Kind of like while we were thinking about it, the year passed by, and we are happy to have as a virtual conference back again. And of course, I would like to definitely thank our presenting sponsor, Bradenton Area Visitors and Conventions Bureau. They have been the sponsor of this conference from day one, from the first conference up to, if we had the pleasure of hosting you in Sarasota, we would be feeding you wonderful food that we have here in our area. We would most likely have our gala dinner on one of our beach resorts that our school has wonderful friends. Some of you maybe have actually attended one of these conferences, but we, of course, do it very, very differently, even though we believe that face-to-face conference cannot be replaced by virtual. Virtual is always good. I mean, look at this. Again, the access, we were talking about access in terms of the number of submissions, which is the double than last year, or the year before, I should say now, 2019. So those are very, very great moments for us. So there is advantage and disadvantages to virtual, and we would like to have your feedback in the future years, and at least in America right now, in some other parts of the world, as we see the COVID-19 looks like it's being contained and travel is coming back, at least in the United States. I know that China, for a fact, that it's been back for a long time. So a lot of people are craving to go back to the conferences. For future, we need your input and feedback to keep it as a virtual conference, or maybe to do it in person again after next year, let's say 2022 and on. Of course, hybrid is an option, but then your event hosting center must be hybrid ready. That's also challenging as well too. So in this conference, you may have noticed that we already started the concurrent sessions. The first two sessions took place this morning. I have been going to different rooms from time to time. It looked like it was great conversation there. So we would like to thank all of the authors who have been already presenting, and those of you, the attendees who have been listening to those presentations. And every single day, we are going to have a panel, keynote panel session. So instead of having a keynote presenters, as we used to do in the past, this year, we wanted to change the concept to a panel. For that reason, you are going to have 3 different panels this year. And the last one, I will start here on June 10th, the last day of our conference, which will be the 3rd day of Closer 2021. We have an interesting panel on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom instructions for instructors. So this is really rather interesting, because this idea came to us from a certificate program that University of South Florida MoMA College of Business have put together. And believe it or not, this was a certificate program just finished. And actually, Janelle Wells was one of the instructors in that certificate program. And you'll see later, one of our panelists today, Dr. Alexis Mutu, was also one of the leading instructors in that particular certificate program. Believe it or not, 135,000 people have attended the certificate program. Obviously, this is not that, but it will be the idea for this panel came from the certificate program. We have seen as a college, obviously, School of Hospitality and Tourism is in the MoMA College of Business. Dr. Wayne James in the College of Education. We are in the same university, but this is a interdisciplinary effort here that we are doing. And this particular panel will be moderated by Sir Dr. Adam Karmer, one of our faculty members in the School of Hospitality. And he will be hosting Dr. Chong Guan and Janelle Wells, as I have mentioned earlier. And tomorrow, we will have an interesting, which is kind of like my interest area, is artificial intelligence and robots technology. And we are going to host, I will be the moderator of that session tomorrow, 3 distinguished speakers, Dr. Chong Wan, she will join us from Singapore, and Dr. Rinat Rosenberg-Timar. She will join us from Israel. And then we will also have Mr. Daniel Schiff. He will join us from Georgia, USA, and that's going to be the impact of artificial intelligence robots on education. We will be talking in this panel if we, as the educators, will be replaced by robots, let's say 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years time. Will there be a shift from humans to robots that are supported by AI in education? We'll see the answers as well. I'm going to start introducing our today's panel, but I would like to invite Dr. Muhittin Çavuşoğlu to maybe say a few words. By the way, those of you who've been to the previous conferences, Glossar conferences, last three, you may know that Muhittin was always involved, but he was not one of the co-chairs because he was a PhD student. He was behind the scenes, did almost everything, of course, along with our volunteer teams and students, but he was the leader of all of them. And he successfully finished his PhD. And now he's an assistant professor at Northern Arizona University in the School of Hospitality also there. And because he got his PhD, Dr. Wayne James and I invited Muhittin to join the Glossar conference again, but this time as a co-chair. Muhittin, please, the floor is yours for your remarks, and then I will start after that introducing our first panel moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jihan. I can't enough thank you and Dr. James for your continued support, and I'm honored to work with you, and I'm honored to serve this Glossar conference since 2017. So I would like to welcome everyone, and I think we have about 10 minutes so we can start introducing our panelists. So I don't want to take more time from the audience. So thank you so much for your support, and thank you so much for joining this amazing conference. Also, as a last word, I would like to thank our research chair, Aliya Hadid, and our volunteers that are all in sessions, Zahra Kasim, Anudari Muntuya, Luana Nanu, Abraham Terra, Gözde Türk Tarhan, and Omar Parviz. Thank you so much for being part of this conference and helping us.
Thank you, Muhittin. Thank you for everything that you have been doing and you are doing as we speak right now here as well. So I would like to also just remind our attendees some housekeeping items during the general sessions. As you know that this is one of the general sessions, which I'm going to start introducing soon as well. But during the session, please mute your microphones. Sometimes, during Zoom, I'm sure that all of you now, we are kind of like Zoom colleagues, right? Because of this pandemic, that please remember to mute your microphones. And during all of our panels, not only today, but in all of them, we will take questions from our audience. So please keep writing them in the chat box. Myself, Dr. James, and Muhittin will be kind of like screening them and feeding them to our moderator, Dr. Deanne Williams-Bryant. And then she will be asking them to our wonderful panelists throughout the whole conference. And of course, we invite you to communicate with all of our panelists during and after the conference. We really appreciate all of them. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel and welcome all of you one more time to Glossar Conference. This is the fourth conference. We thank also, I have to definitely, we will do it later again, but I would like to thank University of South Florida for hosting, for opening their arms, supporting us, myself, Dr. James, and Muhittin with this conference. Of course, this year it's virtual, but you may not know that we don't charge anything. The registration is free of charge to attend, to present, and also even to publish, because we'll be publishing a book and a proceedings book after this conference. Many of you have already submitted. We have more than 180 submissions out of the 360 submissions that have been submitted. So about 50% acceptance rate there. And those are all will be published. And I would like to thank University of South Florida Library. They allow us to use their services, which normally cost a lot of money. So even though the conference is free, but there is a lot of cost behind it. So thanks to University of South Florida and M3 Center and the library for allowing us to share and disseminate this wonderful research. Okay, now it's time for me to introduce our next panel. I'm not going to introduce the panelist, but I will introduce our moderator, Dr. Deanne Williams-Bryant. Before I start reading her short bio, I would like to tell you that she and I already did work several times. We did a great and wonderful think tank on HBCU's We Can't Breathe. You may remember that we had the incident last year. And then after that, we put this think tank together, and it was wonderful, very successful. And we created a report based on that think tank, and it is available at m3center.org. The website, it's also on our website as well, that you can download it for free of charge, obviously. And she's a champion in hospitality. Dr. Deanne Williams-Bryant is the founding dean, professor, and academic officer of the Bob Billingsley School of Hospitality Management. A seasoned hospitality educator, she has served in many roles in both the instructional and administrative sectors of hospitality and tourism education, while being an active member of both state and local tourism associations and the campus community. With a myriad of professional affiliations, Dr. Williams-Bryant has demonstrated a commitment to teaching excellence with an accomplished record of research, scholarship, and community service. She is experienced in developing innovative and relevant educational curriculum to prepare graduates for careers in the global hospitality industry. Dr. Williams-Bryant's expertise in accreditation is evidenced by her service and leadership as the standing commissioner for ACFA, the Accreditation Commission for Programs in Hospitality Administration, which, by the way, University of South Florida is accredited by ACFA just last year. She has served as the president of HBCU Hospitality Management Consortium, board member for ICRE, which is a professional organization for hospitality educators, responsible for establishing and the research and teaching academies. And she was awarded the Stevenson Fletcher Award for Excellence in Hospitality Higher Education. Without further ado, Dr. Williams-Bryant, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much, Jihan, for that warm welcome and detailed introduction. I could not believe that was me you were talking about. I have certainly enjoyed working with you, and I wish you a successful conference, the Glasser Conference, which is now a part of our institutional structure for the summers going forward. I am privileged to be the host or the moderator for this panel of esteemed colleagues. So the topic at hand is one that is of interest to everyone, salary equity, especially in the academic world, right, across gender and race. And the question is, are we there yet? Are we there yet? So I will introduce the panelists who will tell us whether or not they think we are or how close we are to getting there. First, we have Dr. Angela Christian. Dr. Christian is a professor of marketing and director of the MBA program at UNLV. She has a BS in electrical engineering from Rice University, MS in marketing, MBA, and PhD from Virginia Tech. She has held management positions for 13 years before pursuing the doctorate. So she has a wealth of industry experience. As of 2020, she has published over 60 peer-reviewed journal papers, in addition to other speaking events. And in 2016, she gave a TED Talk at UNR titled Opposition, the Light Outside the Dark Box. At UNLV, consuming to creating, watching to doing, and seeing to being. She has received numerous awards for her work, including most recently the UNLV Foundation Distinguished Teaching Award in 2015, the Barrick Scholar Award in 2016, and the Harold and Muriel Bertman Research Grant Award in 2016 as well. She's had 2 Faculty Opportunity Awards in 2014 and 2016, and most recently, the UNLV Alumni Association Outstanding Faculty for 2019. She's a runner. She has completed over 70 marathons, several ultra marathons, and 4 100-milers. And she is a Taekwondo black belt. Wow. Next, we have Dr. Alexis Matu. Dr. Matu serves currently as the Associate Vice President, Resource Management and Community Development for Student Success at USF. In her position, she manages $10 million of a diverse financial portfolio and is responsible for HR functions for over 800 employees and 2,000 students at USF. Her research interest includes examining survival and persistence of institutional and structural racism in liberal spaces in America. She has investigated the underpinnings of affirmative action in the United States and also in Brazil, and has compared the positive and negative effects of Afro-descendants in publicly funded university systems. She teaches courses in Africana Studies and focuses on culture and racism. She's also done some work in the political science and Latin American studies at USF. She has created a course called Prejudice, Stigma, and Racial Consciousness at the behest of students demanding more instructional opportunities, delving into racism and prejudice. So in line with the times. Most recently, Dr. Matu has collaborated with the Muma College of Business at USF and the Tampa Bay Lightning and Jabil to create a diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace certificate program, which was delivered and mentioned earlier by Jihan and very well received. So welcome, Dr. Matu. Next, we have Dr. Robert Toubkushian, and I hope I pronounced your name correct, Dr. Robert, I'll say. He's a professor of higher ed at the Institute of Higher Education, University of Georgia. He earned a PhD in economics from Indiana University and has since specialized in conducting research on issues pertaining to faculty compensation. The topic, welcome, Dr. Matu. Next, we have Dr. Robert. Oh, am I on? Dr. Toubkushian has conducted salary equity studies for several institutions, including the University of Minnesota, Dartmouth College, University of Missouri, and Villanova University, all prestigious universities, and has served as an expert witness in several salary equity cases in academia. Prior to becoming a faculty member, Dr. Toubkushian worked in the field of institutional research at the University of Minnesota and the University System of New Hampshire. He regularly teaches workshops for institutional researchers on how to conduct salary equity studies at their institutions. And there we have our panelists. So the topic I share is about salary equity. A very important topic in these times, especially after we have been ravaged by the pandemic, and the inequities within our society have been very present in our lives. On TV and everywhere we turn, folks are now talking about equity, and efforts are being made in some spheres to bring the playing field a little more level. The panelists here have done work in this field, and in particular, we want to focus on the academic realm within which most of us exist. A satisfaction survey was done by USF recently, and the findings will be shared with you on the screen. But first of all, I would like to have the panelists talk about their perspective on salary equity, and then we will look at the findings more specifically in order to figure out where we are and where we go from here in this important area. So Dr. Alexis Nicole, if I could have you start off, having done work recently at USF and being familiar with the study, what is your perspective on this? And we'll have each panelist respond accordingly.
So thank you for having me. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity. So the idea of salary equity is a very complex issue because people look at it from a macro perspective, but depending on what state you're in, depending on what kind of institution you're working for, there are a number of variables that will influence the notion of salary equity. It's not just as simple as saying you have, two faculty members who started at the same time and obviously should be paid the same. But there are variables that I always ask people to take great consideration in, and that is the discipline that you find yourself in. There's no doubt that the events of last year surely illuminated disparity, with respect to people of color in general, right? And so there's no doubt that is happening, but that has gone on for centuries at this point, and it's maintained over centuries because we're never getting to the actual root of the problem, which is multifaceted. So it's a cultural problem, it's an institutional problem, it's a many-faceted problem that has to be dissected accordingly so that when we are actually talking about salary equity, we're presenting facts that allow for a clear understanding of whether a lack of equity exists, right? So, I'm in a position at this point where, I'm responsible for the management of a lot of different employees who have the same classification. We won't, not faculty necessarily, but certainly staff, right? And I've had to explain to staff, if you arrived at the university earlier than someone else, if you have different set of credentials than someone else, if you have a different number of employees that you're responsible for, those are differences. And so you have to be very micro when you're analyzing any kind of position, when you're trying to establish whether there is equity or not, right? I think that what's most important is not necessarily salary equity, but it's presence, right? So, and I am in political science. And so when I look at the political science department that I am part of, or is the School of Interdisciplinary and Global Studies, when I'm looking for people who look like me, are they there? And if they are, what is the percentage of them being there, right? So from my vantage point, this idea of salary equity is the end of the conversation. The beginning of the conversation has more to do with looking to see how diversity is represented in your department, in your college, in your unit, and then wondering why there's disparate representation with respect to diversity. So historically in political science, it's been a white-dominated field, which apparently, when you're comparing political science to sociology, for instance, political scientists will get paid more than sociologists, but you're more likely to find people of color in sociology than in political science, which then automatically creates, disparate pay or disparity in salary, right? But it's the discipline that's calling for higher pay that has less representation of diversity than a field like sociology and anthropology that seems to be more interesting to people who are more diverse. And so I always urge people to look at historical trends with respect to disciplines and to look at years of tenure and research, because all of those factors will play a part in your compensation. And so when we're making comparisons, we have to make sure to compare apples to apples, because I'm finding myself in many conversations where apples and oranges are being compared, which then sort of debunks any kind of disparate pay argument, right? Because when disparity is uncovered, you have to be ready to argue every point of view to make sure that your claims are heard. And I'm finding that that conversation becomes harder and harder because there's so many variables in play that it's optimal for anyone looking at this data to be very, very cautious and smart about how they're presenting the data, so that if there is disparate pay, the argument is clear and the evidence is there to support the argument. If not, the claims of disparate pay get thrown away and there's no progress. And I think that this is what we've seen over the years. I saw this in my research with affirmative action, where the basis of affirmative action was to even out the playing field for, between, privileged and, minorities who weren't privileged. And affirmative action has taken a completely different direction, because arguments have been presented to substantiate in some spaces that affirmative action is reverse discrimination. And so if we extrapolate that argument to salary and salary equity, particularly in the realm of higher education, we're smart enough, right? We're smart enough to gather up enough data and present it in such a way that, we are able to make claims, if in fact it is so, and we can argue to right size, whatever disparities are uncovered. I hope I'm making sense.
Good start. I am sure the audience is intrigued by your studies and being in a different field from most of us are. That brings in a totally different perspective, but still applicable to academia. Dr. Robert, what is your take on this?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. As mentioned in the very beginning, sort of my experiences with salary equity for faculty come in two different ways. First, I conduct research using data from individual institutions and also nationally representative data to try to measure pay equity for female faculty. And I also work with institutions, individual colleges, to conduct studies on their campus because they're always interested in trying to determine, is there some kind of pay bias with regard to gender on their campuses? So that's sort of where I come at this. I think in the beginning, it's very important for people to make a distinction between two concepts, pay equity and pay equality, because sometimes they get confused. And studies of pay equity or, focus in academia often start with pay equality and really sort of overlook the pay equity part. So pay equality would say, is there a difference in the average salaries between male and female faculty? And when you look at data using national data, institutional data, and so forth, time and time again, you see a difference in average pay by gender of about 20%. It's remarkable how consistent this is across institutions and across time and so forth. But that's not necessarily pay equity. because as Alexis was mentioning, there could be these factors that were differences on average between male and female faculty in things that might affect their compensation that really are separate from gender. So pay equity, to do an assessment of that, you have to identify those factors and then remove their influence from that average pay difference to try to say, in some sense, if I had comparable male and female faculty in terms of their qualifications and things that might affect their compensation, is there a remaining pay difference between them? So it's important to first of all understand that difference between the two. In the research that I've done and that I've read on this topic, I think there are a couple main general conclusions that people have come up with. First of all, it's this idea that I mentioned before, this statistic that we commonly find this 20% pay difference, average pay difference by gender, and looking across different types of institutions. However, the studies that academics have done have also consistently found that at least 3/4 of this difference is attributable to factors such as their years of experience, their academic field or discipline, and other kinds of factors that theoretically we should argue could affect their compensation. And these remainders, depending upon the sample size you're looking at and so forth, sometimes they're statistically significant, sometimes they're not statistically significant, depending upon where it falls. But in the general ballpark, at least in the studies that I've been doing, find gender pay gaps, unexplained pay differences somewhere between 2 to 4% after you control for all of these other factors. So I think the real big puzzle now is, why do we still see this difference, this 2 to 4% difference? I mean, from a statistical point of view, we could say, okay, it's not statistically significant, or even if it is significant, maybe it's not large on a macro basis, but to an individual, 4% pay difference is, adds up. It's still something that we need to understand and try to remove and correct. But the problem is we don't really know where it comes from. So some people, I've done some research where I've tried to determine maybe it's omitted factors such as research productivity that accounts for this. Because of people like me that do these statistical studies, we often don't have good data on research productivity. And it could be that this is part of the thing that's explaining that difference. And in the work that I've done and others have done, we found that that helps explain some of that pay gap, but not all of it. So there's still something left over. And also, when you think about higher education, it's hard to imagine that these pay differences would dramatically increase over time, because as we all know, salary increases we get tend to be fairly small and fairly uniform. I remember at Indiana fighting over a 1.5% versus a 1.75% raise one year. And it's going to take a long time for something like that to add up if it was systematically different by gender to come up with a large enough difference. So the main argument that people make that they've offered for explaining this is that maybe the pay differences are due at the time of hire, rather than anything that happens once somebody gets in the pipeline and hired at an institution. And in a way, this makes sense, because there's a lot more flexibility to colleges and universities when they hire somebody, as opposed to the salary increase that they give them once they're in the door. So it's easier for them to offer a higher salary to someone, in regard to their compensation, negotiations and so forth. It also fits in with the anecdotal stories that people have offered that male faculty may be more likely to negotiate than female faculty are. So maybe this is explaining some of that difference. The problem is this is really hard to test. We don't have good data on this to rigorously test this and say, yes, this is happening, or no, this isn't happening. I tried to get at this in a study back in 2008, where I estimated salary models for only recently hired faculty and then compared them to the results that we would have gotten if we looked at everybody. And interestingly, we found that it went against that argument, that the pay differences for recently hired faculty were notably smaller than the pay differences, the unexplained pay differences for everybody when we took them all together. So we're still not sure what's really causing all of this. And then to get back to the main question that for this panel, are we there yet? I would say we don't know. And in part, we don't know because of data limitations. The federal government used to conduct longitudinal or cross-sectional studies every 5 years of faculty using what's called the NSOF, a National Study of Post-Secondary Faculty. And people like me have tortured these data over time and gotten publications and tenure and everything based on it. But the main goal or the advantage of it is that you could estimate these models and look at how things are changing over time and then say, okay, it looks like we're making progress, or we're not making progress, or this sector is making progress and this one isn't. So we could do all of that. But the last time the federal government conducted this survey of faculty was in 2004. So it's 17 years since we've done this, and I haven't heard any rumblings at the federal government level of any interest to bring it back. I think it was mainly due to finances and so forth that they decided to focus surveys on students and not on faculty. And in a way we can understand that, but it also means that we don't have good information about this very important topic for us.
Very good. Very, very valuable information. Dr. Christian, you're up next. What is your perspective?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. It is 8:20 here in Las Vegas, so I am having morning time while you're having lunch. Couple of things. First of all, my intro, I don't think really spoke to some of the stuff I've been doing in this space. My own, nobody else's fault but mine, but I wanted to bring up a couple of things that I have been doing in the space and probably why I'm in the panel. I have recently published a few papers dealing with kind of the topic of inequity, but it's across kind of looking at, I had a piece in 2020 that was looking at gender and looking at, I want to kind of break up my little conversation here about covert and overt, first of all, because I think looking at what we're talking about here is overt, right? Salary is a number, it's objective. We can, if you're at UNLV, my university, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, it is public. You can download the salaries of any of us any day you want. You will see everything you want to see. You will see things that Alexis spoke about regarding the different fields and how certain fields are more higher paid than others. Everything, it's all out in the open. And then you have the rationalism or whatever rationality you can then argue for, right? Oh, quantitative people make more than qualitative people. Oh, certain fields are, quote, easier than other fields. Oh, this person does marketing and marketing is easier than, finance or accounting, whatever. So everybody has these sort of rationalities behind why certain fields might anyway have base levels that are higher. But I wanted to bring it back to this covert overt sort of dichotomy, and in some ways what both Rob and Alexis spoke about, which I was thinking of, the kind of the macro micro. And the work that I've done is about the covert first. So I want to back up a little. We can't really talk about salary until we talk about data, right? And so I think all of us have talked about data on and off. But if you don't have data, right, that's a really good way to take care of the entire issue, right? So if you go to a university and you can't find out, for example, what is the teaching load? Who's getting the most preps? What kind of service is being done and by who and why, right? So these kind of basic things, which are generally not public, you are the first ways to create that inequity. So if we kind of back up to these covert things, what happens is, and that's kind of the piece that I talk about, is the salary is at the end of the day an outcome. We know this, as we do research, it's an outcome variable. What goes into that salary are all the antecedents. And those things could be, as both Rob and Alexis have spoke about, performance, right? So if our key performance indicators for faculty are, for example, your Google Scholar citations, which is a number. We love objective numbers. Your number of publications, the rank of your publication. So if you're in business school, we have what we call the Holy Trinity. We have 3 top journals in almost every field. You don't publish in those, big discount. So any number of these things can go into play to kind of quote unquote post-rationalize a salary. So how do you then affect those numbers, right? Those are even the pre-antecedents. Those are the things like microaggressions, sexism, racism, differential treatment in terms of service and teaching. Any of these things that basically are very hard to broaden and talk about. And that's why the title of my paper is The Story Only Few Can Tell. So let me explain why I titled my paper that. There's a reason. It also won Best Paper or honor honor place for best paper, whatever, honorable mention. But it's important to say this because how can you talk about these covert things without being, for example, a full professor? When you're in a system that works on consensus, it works on homophily, it works on voting. The people in the room voting for me for tenure, they all look a certain way that I don't look. The people in the room voting for me for full professor, if they all look a certain way that I don't look, I need to fit in. The last thing I can do is start publishing things about salary inequity, right? As a brown female. So understand that I'm the one with the skin in the game on this. I'm the one who would be, I mean, Rob, you're, I think, pretty much an outlier here. Most people who are going to publish on this are going to be people who maybe have experienced it or have some sort of skin in the game. That is natural in academic freedom, right? We publish about things we're interested in. So that paper was in the works for 10, 12, 15 years. It never got published until all three of us on the paper are full professors. So it's one of those things where we need to back up. We can talk about salary inequity, right? It's interesting, it's fun, it's quantitative. But why don't we back up first and think about, do microaggressions occur? How often do they occur? Yes, they do, and they occur quite often. Why don't we talk about intersectionality? So when we talk about gender, it really doesn't make sense to remove race from gender, right? But the reason we do that is because there are, for example, in my entire college, no Black females that are teaching, okay? So how am I gonna talk about that? There's no data. And I'm the only non-white person in my department. So it's one of those things where when you take the number of people that are even in the room, that are even talking about this stuff, and you reduce it to the point that you can't do data collection, you cannot report things. You then don't have those covert measures. You can't look at microaggressions. You can't look at satisfaction differences. It's a lot harder. So what we do know, though, from even the published publication I have is that, yes, women do more teaching preps. I can give my own example. I have significantly more t-test difference in teaching preps than anybody in my department. We do more service. Time and time again, people of color and women do more service. And we know that that then leads to lowered satisfaction. We also know in other work that I'm doing, the satisfaction motivation link. When your satisfaction is lower, you're less motivated. When you're less motivated, you're going to suffer performance differences. So there's all of these things that can then lead to that sort of cutoff where it's, you're not publishing enough. What's wrong with you? You're not getting enough, you're not getting enough awards. So that then leads to a negative cycle of doing less and therefore getting less likelihood of promotion. So again, simple things. If we want to use numbers, look at the number of full professors that are women. Simple. Don't even have to look at POCs. Okay. We've left out sexuality completely, by the way. We've left out sexuality as a factor, which is huge, by the way, and LGBTQI. So once we start putting in these intersectionalities, what we find is there's not only less representation, there's also less satisfaction. That lowered satisfaction then leads to less motivation. That lowered motivation leads to lowered performance, leading to less likelihood of promotion. Look at the top ranks. We have some people in the room, for example, today that are exceptions. These are people that have excelled, right? Beyond what is normal. What we do know is probably the number of people on this panel alone is so not representative of deans or people in higher level positions in universities. It's scary. So, so kind of the thing I wanted to do here today was kind of make sure that we talk about not only the kind of obvious salary equity issues, but also kind of the backdrop of when do you fight for your salary equity? If you do have a salary equity issue, if you can prove it, you have a t-test difference. Hey, look, turns out that every associate professor in my department is making, 20% more than me. What kinds of things can then be used against you to then make sure that you never do become a full professor? Right now, you're not nice. Collegiality becomes congeniality. So there's those things that are important here to think about that we have to back up. And I think that's probably why I'm in the room today, is because my interest is not just in those numbers. I am interested in looking at why is that data not transparent? Why can I not find out, for example, in most departments, on almost every campus, who's teaching what, how many preps have they done, how much even research records are not aggregated in universities. I, for a short period of time, served as the research person in my college, and I put together a data set from 2013 to 2019 to look at aggregate numbers across every single department. As soon as I stepped into the MBA position, that data set was no longer kept up to date. Why? Because it creates a very easy way to do comparisons across gender and race. And what you see is that there are differences in salary that are not matched with differences in performance, because we have a system that is very quantitative. So simple things, that's about all I want to say for starters, but I just want to talk about those covert things that then lead to the overt differences.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Dr. Matu, I think you have something to say as a follow-up to that. And I want this to be dynamic. So I'm not going to ask my questions. I want the panelists to interact with each other. And also we have some questions from the audience. So can you respond?
Absolutely. So thank you. Thank you so much. I want to say your name appropriately, Angela, for stating what you've stated, because I know that as a person, as a woman of color, the intersectionality of my gender, my race and ethnicity, and also my single status have made me sort of this complete anomaly as an associate vice president in a Research One university. However, I'm reminded daily of my gender, reminded daily of my race, whether it's overtly or covertly, and also reminded of my singlehood as a person who's crunching numbers, at $100 million rate with all these different employees that I'm responsible for. And it also translates in me being an adjunct, because I adjunct, right? But what's also really unfortunate about this entire thing is that because I excel, then every argument that is made by a person of color who feels that they're being treated disparately is thrown out of the window because of this exact dynamics that Angela is talking about, where it's just completely dismissed. So in my field, both academically and professionally, I just decided that I was going to speak my mind and was willing to be fired for speaking my mind. But at the same time, I'm reminded often that I'm perhaps in a room because of my color and because of this responsibility that institutions of higher education have right now to have, administration and faculty resemble their student populations, right? So I literally was just told yesterday, oh, you were asked to be on this committee probably because of their need for diversity. And so when things like this are coming your way, the productivity and your desire to stay in an institution that welcomes you is whittled away slowly but surely. And the one thing that I will add is that when we're looking at pay equity, we also have to look at years of service. So to Angela's point, people who are unhappy will go to another institution and essentially start from scratch. The likelihood of someone leaving as a faculty member in one institution and starting in another institution at the exact same level is zero, even if they have the credentials, requirements are the same, because they don't have those relationships, right? So my success at USF has been to build relationships with wonderful people who, obviously represent every spectrum of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? However, I had to develop those relationships in a positive manner and not be considered an angry Black woman as I am navigating through very difficult conversations at times because I'm responsible for firing people and those types of things, right? But that doesn't preclude people in meetings for saying to me, well, Alexis, you seem so serious. Well, I present numbers. Why are you saying that to me? Why are you not saying that to my male counterparts?
Alexis,
and then
that's a microaggression. That's literally the definition of a microaggression. Yes.
Exactly. And then, but
interrupt you, by the way.
No,
but I say literally that, right? So what happens to you in that moment? In that moment, what happens, right?
I'm demeaned. I'm completely demeaned. And so now what I've done is to use sort of dry humor and ridiculous, like sensational humor, in order to diffuse the situation. And that's it, because I'm not going to participate in these kinds of things, but that is understanding that I'm willing to be fired. And most people aren't, right? My son is a grown up, and so I don't have to worry about taking care of him anymore. So I refuse to mute myself, as I did the entire time that my son was growing up, because I was deathly afraid of the repercussions of being straightforward. And doing this work has made me understand that I have to speak up. So I do speak up and I do make people uncomfortable. But I appreciate you bringing that up, because these salary equity is so easily debunked. Data is so easily debunked, but the variables that put you where you are. So this idea that, for instance, when Rob was talking about the issues of, like the gender disparity and about 2 to 4%, it is because more likely you will find more women doing service in the academy. That is really not measured as something that is to be applauded, right? And so, but if women are doing the service and they're spending their time doing that service because that's how they elevate themselves in their positions, they're not able to spend that time, focusing on research. So at USF, we have community engagement. That's part of our pillars of success, right? That means going out and connecting with organizations and people outside of the community. Well, that's work. That's a lot of work. That's taking away from your opportunity to perform it from a research point of view. And so then you don't get promoted the way that you should be, because you're not being applauded and lauded for the actual work that you're doing to make student success an actual thing, which is because that's not really measured. And so then you leave and you go to another institution and you start from scratch. And so I just think that I got very excited at hearing you speak, because it's like you were speaking my language. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, and that's the thing. We do have to back up, right? Because and everything you said, I'm snapping too, because, and talking about those microaggressions is really, 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 really important. And the reason is because those are actually things we can track. I mean, and I did a recent piece with, and it's funny you said political science. I don't know if you know Rebecca Gill, but she got a big NSF grant for Me Too. She's been a big advocate of Me Too poli-sci. And so I ended up doing a piece on Me Too with, and it's totally interdisciplinary. That's one of my things. But the other thing that I didn't say that I wanted to add to what Alexis said, and I think all of us should think about and talk about, is not only that intersectionality, because it is important. Those data that, for example, Rob is talking about, women are women. That's it. We're not different colored women. And the problem with that scenario is, inevitably, when you start to sort it, you will notice that there is a racial difference. So that certain women are paid less based on their race. So it's a dangerous thing. And the other quick thing I wanted to say was, interdisciplinary is important too to think about here, because you start to look across the different disciplines and you kind of see that when we work together, we get a lot more interesting nuance. And the Me Too is a great example of kind of what Alexis was talking about, with lack of fear and this idea of kind of working together and actually reporting these things and talking about these things, whether it's salary inequity, whether it's microaggression, whether it's, oh, you're only successful because you're a woman. Oh, you're only in the room because you're brown or black or white or pink or whatever color you are. As soon as people get discounted like that, the kind of emotional baggage that goes with that, not only in the room at that moment, but going forward, the decisions you make, the trajectory that it has on your research and your life is massive. And so a piece that I'm now working on is looking at that kind of long-term. We're taking data that was collected 10 years ago, and we're looking at kind of the long-term implications of what happens to people's careers. They are, a Google Scholar, they've got 10,000 citations, but guess what? It looks like 10 years out, something happened here, and it looks like there's a pattern that specifically seems to be only women and only people of color. So what's up with that, right? So anyway, so I 100% agree. These are important things to think about, because if we're not talking about those subjective things, those covert things, we're kind of missing too much. The equation is missing a lot. So I feel bad because, Rob, you haven't been saying anything, so I'm going to shut up. Rob, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Rob. And
right.
there are several questions in the chat related to what you're saying, guys. This is so exciting, because now the covert becomes overt, and that's what this is about. Dr. Rob.
All right. I appreciate all the comments and the discussion. It's been very interesting and important. Because you're right. When you look at the models or the way in which we typically assess salary equity, we take characteristics or measures such as number of publications or other kinds of career markers like that, and try to see how they're correlated with salary and use that as one of our assessments. But the problem is we don't know how those are produced. So it could be that there's all sorts of inequities in between gender and between race, and how faculty members acquire a number of publications or grant funding or other things like that that we know are important determinants of how much somebody is paid. Now, the real challenge is, how do we measure these things? And even the government data that I mentioned before, the NSOF surveys, can't really get at it perfectly because they're just cross-sectional snapshots of people. And what you really need is a large data set that follows individuals from the time that they get their degree all, for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Then you could see this kind of pattern of how the same people emerge over time, how their careers are, either boosted upward by certain kinds of support or held down because they're given too many service requirements or larger teaching loads or other things like that. So, I agree. It's a very important topic, and I'd love to see a data set that would follow, a large enough set of individuals like this so that we could get this kind of evidence and then say, use it to test these ideas and then use that to inform our other kind of work.
What I wanted to add briefly is that there are particular variables that people seem to not take into consideration. So in the people assume that affirmative action is just solely race-based because that's its underpinnings, right? But there are a number of states in the United States that don't have race-based affirmative action, which means that this idea of designating yourself by race is your choice, which it should be, but data is not tracked in that way. So in the state of Florida, I mean, there are very specific things that in my research I could not do, but I could do in New York, in the state of New York, because they have more robust tracking and designation mechanisms so that you can start to understand how different pockets are being treated differently. And so that's one component that no one seems to ever talk about. And I'm always shouting, wait, the state of Florida is top 10% affirmative action. It's not race-based. We can't talk about race. We can't target particular groups to hire because that goes against what the state of Florida calls for. And so, I mean, not that I'm suggesting that all administrations get a pass, but when there's salary equity issues, that's one variable that absolutely can never be forgotten, because some institutions are in positions where they can't track the data in a way to demonstrate any kind of disparate pay. So.
I'm going to read one question from the chat. There are several there, but this one I think is pressing, and it reads: does the panelist believe that you must change your workplace in order to increase your salary? Will a change of environment, a physical change, make a difference?
Oh, so in other words, would you, so that's the whole leaving the current institution, moving to a different institution question?
Yes.
I guess, oh, okay.
Would that change the dynamics?
There's two ways to answer it. One, unfortunately, probably a lot of times, right? It's unfortunate. But another way to think about that is maybe this person's talking about institutional versus individual. And my understanding, and again, I am literally just dipping my toes into this work and I haven't done enough. So thank you for having me on the panel. But the reality of it is, what I have read and what I do know is you cannot fix at an individual level. You have to fix at an institutional level. So when we start to look at these things, I don't know, the only way to really look at it is to say, okay, I need to get enough. I put down the word stage because I felt immediately, I thought of that when I think Alexis and Rob were talking, is we have to get a stage first. And how do you get to the stage? How do you become an advocate? How do you find out what's going on? How do you even get data? Because data is hidden, right? It's not, we're in a lot of smoke and mirrors environments where data is not easily accessible. And so to get to that stage, you have to have a certain level of performance. And so I've always kind of backed up, again, talking about this covert stuff, and thought, I need to mentor people. That is my duty as somebody who maybe has somewhat made it to the stage. I need to get back and say, okay, who are these people that are somehow hidden, that are not fitting in with the homophily, that are not at the table? How do I help them? I help them get published. I work with them, whatever. That's not work that I get compensation for, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I'm doing myself a favor too, because the more people we bring into the conversation, the better we are. So I think, to answer your question, you don't always have to leave. Sometimes you can just work on where you are and you can try to figure out, and I don't mean to sound like I'm making light of it, because I'm not. But rolling, if I think about the two women in here right now that I know are outliers, right, that are on this panel right now, these two women have rolled with the punches. They have faced overt, covert, all kinds of stuff. I guarantee it. They can talk for days, hours, years. I guarantee it. And they rolled with it. They stayed the course. They said, I need to move forward. Why? Because I need to speak for not only who I am, but for what I stand for. And I need to bring my experience into the room. So that kind of thing, we're lucky when we have people like that. My personal charge right now is to uplift these people, because they, at the end of the day, are helping the cause. They're helping the institution. So to answer your question, you can either leave, right, and try your best to make it, but you're always going to eventually have to change the institution. Sooner or later, that institution has to change. You can float around all you want, but you have to, the institution has to change. So my advice is always figure out where you can find a voice.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the exact same thing. I had an opportunity about 2 months ago to leave, to go across the country, because I'd been told that if I leave, I'm more likely, my work is more likely to be recognized. And in the final analysis, I realized that I was going to walk into any situation that was going to receive me the way that I've been received here. And so I opted to stay. And I'm glad that I opted to stay, because to Anala's point, I am working on making a difference here. But I always encourage people to think long and hard about leaving, because it is convenient. However, it is a fight that you're going to have wherever you're going to go. And it's like leaving the fight, as opposed to walking into a fight that you don't know anything about. And so I would never tell anybody what to do, but I always tell my peers and my colleagues to just make very, very intentional decisions, because if they're leaving one place to find utopia somewhere else, it's just not going to happen. The problems are, as Angela said, they're institutional issues, and that, we just have to just chip away at them.
Yeah. I think now, Jihan, might be a good time to share the study with the audience. We do have some data that was presented by the Faculty Salary Satisfaction Survey that will address the major points, and we look at the findings to see how that intersects with what we've heard so far.
Sure, thank you. Of course, yeah, here it is. And this was done this year, and it was about 1,100 faculty members across the United States. It did not look specifically about the race of the faculty member, but the gender. As you can see, between male and female, the response that we got was almost 50-50, as you can see here. Here's one of the salary tables that you will see here, based on the gender for private, public, and all combined together. And here you can see, I'm not going to read all the numbers, but you can just, even if you look at very quickly in the female column, and you can look at the male column, that you see, with the exception of in the public institution, the instructors, at least for the sample, they are making slightly a little bit less. In one case, I do remember that they were making a little bit more than male, but in every single situation, the difference, the salary difference between males and females are significantly different. Males were making, I think Dr. Rob was telling earlier, 20%, if I'm not mistaken. This appears to be in that kind of ratio. It looks like the male are making about 20% more than the female faculty members, regardless of it is private or public. By the way, this is only US, nothing outside. And if you were to look at the differences between different disciplines, and you will be able to see that the blue ones are male, the orange ones are female, almost without any exception. In every kind of field, the male professors are making more than female professors. And when we look at the also satisfaction, about almost half of them were not satisfied with their annual salary, regardless of their gender. 70% of them were satisfied with their current position, but not the salary itself. And 67% are satisfied with their immediate supervisor. And about almost 20% are dissatisfied with their professional career.
Great. So in every instance here, we're seeing that the female is, I'm not going to use the word at a disadvantage, but that tells the story right there. Regardless of the unmentionables and the factors that we take into consideration, there is not one instance where the female gender dominates. Is that a factor that has anything to do with negotiation skills or emotional intelligence, as we're seeing in the chat? Could that have something to do with it?
No.
No, no.
I don't believe that, no. There's, first of all, any difference is socialized. So we know this from lots of biology research. So any difference is socialized. So when girls are raised to think math is hard, they think math is hard. When they don't, they don't. And so we need to just put that aside right there. There's but what is going on, right, is power works. Lack of power does not work. So I'm not going to go to my boss and ask for more money when I'm 2 levels below them and I might get fired, right? Or I'm on the chopping block. So women are not less likely to negotiate. They're less able to negotiate. You cannot go and negotiate your salary when you're trying to fight for a promotion. What we don't see there is an N next to those salaries. I guarantee you that the number of women in those higher level positions, and that is in my paper, is significantly lower. So what happens is the attrition, either by leaving and going to another institution, and like Alexis said, starting over, or giving up, right? I'm done. I can't, there's only so much of this sexism, racism I can take. What happens is fewer women ever get to full professor. When I started at UNLV in the business school, facts are facts, there were no women full professors. There were 29 male full professors. In the first 5 years of me being a faculty member, 2 women got promoted to full professor. 2 in 5 years. By 2011, there were still only 2 women full professors in my college, and there were 30 plus male full professors. When I got tenure in 2013, I was only one of 4 women tenured full professors in my college. And I'm the first ever woman to get tenure or full professor in my department, and still the only woman who's full professor. So understand that the numbers are very simple. They tell you the story. We need to be looking at the number, not just the salary. When you see a lower number, what you notice as you go to the higher level position. So for chairs, there's 5 men that are chairs in my college right now, no women. 2 associate deans, both men, and the dean is a man. So when you see that these positions of power are held by men, what happens is women are less likely to say anything. They're not less likely to negotiate because they're scared or because they have lack of emotional intelligence. They're less likely to negotiate because they don't have power. Power is very simple. It's how everything works. So yeah, we need to take those things off the table. Women can negotiate just fine. The problem is they're not likely to do it when they're in a lower position and maybe have an issue with performance. I want to quickly say 2 other quick things before because I know I don't want to take up too much space, but I have not talked about the diversity creativity link, and I am working on papers on that. Something that I want to make super clear and that I do in every conversation I have is the reason we want diversity, the reason we want inclusion is not because we like people of color. We should like them and they're wonderful, but that's not why. All of us need to understand that it also helps. There are significant differences in creativity based on interdisciplinary, cognitive diversity. There's research to back that up, and racial diversity. So the higher the lack of homophily in a group brings about more creativity. Creativity is good. So that's number 1 reason we want to have that diversity to creativity link. So anytime somebody tells you, oh, you're in the room because you're different. No, I'm in the room because we need to actually get work done here. That's why I'm in the room. I'm in the room because otherwise we're all going to do the exact same thing we did yesterday. So last I checked, I'm increasing our creativity. Number two, the satisfaction motivation link. Those are two links I want to keep on bringing up. We cannot be motivated if we're not satisfied. So figure out how to get satisfied. That's it. I'm going to shut up now.
The only thing I wanted to add is this idea of imposter syndrome. So, one of the reasons why I believe women, and I'm one of those women, did not fight for myself is because I did not feel like I belonged. And so I, sort of took on this spirit of being a wallflower when that's nothing of my personality, right? And so there is a dynamic or, emotional intelligence focusing on getting rid of imposter syndrome, because I've read a lot of research that many, like there's a huge percentage of women in the academy who suffer from imposter syndrome, don't know that they're suffering from it, are marginalizing themselves in many spaces. And so that is one thing that you can do to help yourself. And because I found myself negotiating 2 months ago. And it's because I've been working on getting rid of this imposter syndrome and using emotional intelligence to say, I belong here. And if you don't believe that, that's on you. That's not on me. And I was shocked that it was well received. And I just encourage any person who doesn't feel like they belong to believe in themselves, because that will go a long way in their ability to negotiate and be successful in any space.
Another question from the chat. Thank you. In my country, and I'm not sure what country that is, but this is a global conference, so we need to take a look, I guess, at what happens outside of the US. All assistant professors make the same salary, same for associate professors, and this is set by the government. Do you think that's a better strategy? But the converse of that is, would it affect creativity, innovation, and motivation for faculty members to perform? So if we had an across-the-board standard, would that resolve the problem?
Well, I can speak to this a little bit because I've also done work on K-12 education in the United States, and that's exactly what we do on K-12 education. So if you look at a public school salary schedule, everybody is paid the same based upon their years of experience and their educational attainment. So they'll put together a matrix and then say, if you have, every teacher has 5 years experience and a bachelor's degree, gets paid $52,000 or something like that. So that does remove the statistical appearance of inequity. The problem is it makes it really hard for them to hire teachers that have different areas of expertise. So if you look at public K-12 schools, when they advertise for a science teacher or computer science teacher, they have a really hard time finding anybody that will work for that low of a pay. But yet when they advertise for an English teacher or a history teacher, they get dozens of applications. So that's the problem. That's the trade-off. In higher education, we allow salaries to vary by field like that so that, we can hire people, an adequate number of people that are qualified in different areas and disciplines that we say are valuable and needed for higher education. But the downside is then it introduces more pay disparities across different types of groups.
And there's a mention of unions. Would new unions may be a barrier to adjusting salary for women? Maybe the best thing is to go and get an offer and then ask to match. So I guess that answers that. But we're talking about finding ways to make it more equitable across the board. Could the union make a difference? There are some areas where unions apply and then others that don't. So I don't think that would necessarily be a resolution. So we're coming up to the end of this session, and I wanted to give each person an opportunity to speak. Their last bit. The data, of course, is important, as we all know. And there was a question in the chat asking whether or not Dr. Robb has data to support the study. Many questions there, and this is a topic that could go on forever and ever. But you are the experts. I'm giving you an opportunity now, about 20 seconds each, to wrap up and make your last point.
I can start, first of all, by saying how appreciative I am of being on this panel with these, really smart, great people, and that you would have this conversation, because the more conversations we have about this, the more we can sort of get to the root of fixing any kind of disparate pay, salary, treatment, overt, covert. And so I deeply appreciate this panel and the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, for my 20 seconds here, I'll just add that, I think we all agree we want to try to do whatever we can to make sure people are compensated fairly. That when we don't do that, that's wrong. We want to try to fix it. And I think to try to get to that point, we really need better data and information. That's the only way we can test some of these ideas and conjectures to see, does the evidence hold up for it? Yes or no? And then what should we do?
I guess I get to wrap. I'm just going to say thank you also, and just say I didn't get to say community, so I thought about community while Alexis was talking. So for everybody on the panel today, for everybody that's out there that's watching, listening, let's all be a community. Please do find me on LinkedIn. I would love to continue this conversation. We can't make a change at an institutional level as individuals. We have to think about the issues and the problems as a group. And so thank you for your allyship. All of you that are here, it's already been great to meet all of you on the panel. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. And Dr. Deanne, I'm going to give you an opportunity to weigh in on this as we wrap up.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Williams-Bryant. And I would like to also thank you and all of our panelists. I learned a lot from this session as well. Normally I study hospitality technology. That's my field. However, my role, and Alexis knows this very well, with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion certificate program, I was behind the scenes, kind of like making sure technology works. And now your panel kind of made me to think that, hey, it's time for me to change my research focus. Maybe this will be my next kind of baby, kind of to take it and grow. So it's really very important. And I can tell the dynamism, the importance, as I've said earlier, we have mentioned 135,000 people participated, which, by the way, salary equity was part of the discussion there. And also the questions that came for this session show me that how important these issues are. And I think that these are not destinations. So we are not going to find a solution immediately. They are a journey. As we go along, we are going to develop, learn better ways how to make it as equitable as possible. I know that for a fact that there are many factors. It's very complex. I actually, Alexis started her words saying that this issue is very complex, but I'm grateful to all of you and of course, all of our attendees for your contribution and participation. I would like to remind all of our attendees that the Glossary Conference continues in the afternoon with 2 concurrent sessions. Glossary.org. You can click on schedule to see all the Zoom links. By the way, the Zoom links are changing every day because sometimes security problems happen. So we do not, post them in advance, but please go to glossary.org. If you're registered, you'll be able to find them. And also tomorrow, we have another excellent panel, just like this one, on artificial intelligence and robotics, the impact of them on education. The question that we will try to answer there in about 15 years, Dr. Rob, Dr. Alexis, Dr. Deanne, and everybody, and also Dr. Angela will be replaced, and myself will be replaced by a robot, by artificial intelligence or not. We'll figure that out. So again, thank you to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you this afternoon in concurrent sessions and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Have a wonderful day, evening, morning, night, wherever you might be, whenever you may be watching this.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Angela. It was a pleasure meeting and working with you. And I am going to step up my game in order to make my voice heard on this topic. Thank you, Jihan, for the opportunity.
Thank
Have a
you all.
wonderful
Yeah,
day.
bye-bye. Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
So much, Bryant.
Thank you.